Welcome to the Phillip Wylie Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Phillip Wylie.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Phillip Wylie Show. Today I'm joined by Traynor. I'm not going to say where he's at yet. I'm going to let him share all that when he tells about himself, but we know each other from the virtual and in-person cybersecurity community, and it's great to finally get Chris on the podcast. So thanks for joining, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, the company you work for, and we can get into that when you start sharing about your background and stuff. But one of the companies that I look up to the most, and really it's amazing because the talent that's within that company and just the company that the founder has built and just the whole attitude towards community is pretty awesome. And one of the reasons I really respect the company, and I'm sure the reason why a lot of other people respect the company as well.
Yeah. So to fill in the gaps for people who haven't assumed it by now, I work as a penetration tester for Black Hills Information Security. So it's a name that's known in the open security community in a lot of different ways, and even kind of outside the security community a little bit as well now as we keep growing. But the community part of it is something that Black Hills BHIS we try to do as much as we can in the community itself, whether that's through trainings, whether that's through conferences, providing resources from blogs, webcasts, or whatever we can to try to get people interested, involved, and knowledgeable about security.
Yeah, pretty cool. So I have all my guests share their hacker origin story. So if you wouldn't mind sharing your hacker origin story.
Sure. Yeah. So my hacker origin story is just I wanted to figure out how things break, more or less. When I went through college, it wasn't a terribly technical program. It had its ups, its downs, which at the time was early 2000s. It wasn't really like a cybersecurity type of background of things. So I started messing around with some stuff on the side and dorm room, things like that. But when I came out of college, there wasn't really like a cybersecurity type of degree that existed. So unless you wanted to start going to work for the government, trying to get in with 3-letter agencies and things like that, which I didn't really have too much of an interest in doing, you had to take kind of the long way around into security. So I landed myself for about a little decade, I landed myself inside of software development, holding different types of roles and positions within that, and really just tried to figure out a way that I could apply security mindsets in those fields. Unfortunately, a lot of the companies that I landed at, they either had their own security groups or they weren't really interested in anybody doing security. At the time, it wasn't like everybody had a smartphone in their pocket. Those things just were becoming available for the general public, and people were starting to realize that technology was all around them, holding lots of information about them, and companies hadn't quite caught up in the private sector, at least in a broad sense, as it being something to pay attention to. So eventually what I wound up doing is I kept doing some training stuff. I kept figuring out new ways to play around with different types of technology. And eventually I found myself looking for a new job and happened to land with a headhunter doing interviews that turned out to wind up be Equifax about 2-3 weeks after they did the post-breach announcement. And if you've ever been with a headhunter going through that process of interviewing, they don't like to tell you the company up front. They kind of get you through the first couple phone calls and then they tell you. But as soon as she told me the organization, I realized the opportunity that for a large organization that's had a very public breach, that has the financial capability to weather that storm and the organizational structure to address it, would be a very good opportunity to sort of break into the security world that I've been trying to get a solid position in for a while. So even though I didn't have an interview set up and a position set up as a security role, I knew I could transition into that pretty quickly in that organization, which turned out to be true. About a month or two in, they started asking on the dev team for people to handle that security stuff. I parlayed that into some, I'll do it, but I want proper training. I want proper capabilities and a little bit of latitude to move around and address certain things, which in that environment, it was the very most important thing at the top of everybody's mind was security. So that's when I started doing various security positions and eventually landing myself in the pen testing world.
Yeah, that's pretty good because some of the things that come with those post breach companies are budgets for tools and budgets for training, whereas before they may have not. Because I got a couple friends and actually a couple other people I knew worked there for a while too. This company that was breached in our area, they were breached like at least 2 times. So training budgets are really good. Tools are able to get whatever tools they need. Seems like companies, finally decide to take things serious after, a breach like that.
Yeah, yeah, it can be very good. I have done a talk or two about using that opportunity of breach organizations as a way to sort of catapult your way into the security world. If that's something that you're trying to obtain and you've been in the same world that I have, where organizations are just like, security this, security that, we'll pass our audit, our check boxes are good. We're not really interested in training anybody unless that's your full-time job. So I encourage people that if you're going to look at post-breach organizations, there are tons of them out there every single year. Every month, there's dozens and dozens. But if you're going to target that path, make sure you ask a lot of questions, their revenue, make sure that their structure and their organization is good. What kind of budget for security do they have? Luckily, with Equifax, it was a situation where most people just think of them as a credit bureau. And how much money could a credit bureau really have flowing in? It turns out a whole lot. So they had a very large budget cap and a 5-year plan immediately at that breach announcement of how much they would spend in security and what their plan was. So I went there for just under 5 years, right before that budget amount starts to dry up and they start to get back to normal. But held a lot of different types of roles in that for security world. So I encourage people to do that as long as you do your research. Don't go to a sinking ship. That's not going to help you. It's just going to land you in unemployment and really sad.
Yeah, that's some interesting perspective and interesting advice on leveraging those post breach companies. That's something I haven't heard before, but sounds good.
So it can be very, very good.
Yeah,
and you wind up getting to know a lot of really good people, and the mindset that some people have heard around the industry is, well, you should never hire anybody that was at a breach organization. And I could tell you from working with one for several years, the people there are so extremely knowledgeable that they are absolutely the type of people you want to bring into your company because they know where the pitfalls are and they know where the road ends if you don't do them. So it can be very, very good to look at those people as a positive in your organization.
So what advice do you have for someone who wants to break into offensive security as far as like training wise and what they need to learn to be able to land a role as a pen tester?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So breaking into offensive security, it is its own little cosmos within the cybersecurity world, like we have with so many other facets of it. And I've likened it before where if you don't know about cybersecurity and you're coming from a bit of the outside, every role that exists in general IT and in general businesses exists as its own specialty inside of cybersecurity, which can be really hard when you try to translate your skills a little bit. The biggest thing you have to switch in your brain when you're trying to make that transition, particularly in the offensive side, for people that are more sysadmins, network admins, general developers, most of the IT world coming into that sort of role, is that you have to start thinking in terms of how things shouldn't work, but they do, right? Abusing that mindset of this feature exists, but what if that feature existed and an attacker wanted to abuse that into a position? So most of the things that we do in the pen testing world, I can count on one hand how many times I've leveraged a backdoor or I've used a 0-day to get into something. It's more just features that exist inside of a technology that you're using in an unknown way, right? Or an unintended way from that development group. So as far as training and things like that, pen testing is one of those, again, specialties in that microcosm of security that requires you to have a bit of a broad knowledge, which I do have regrets that I had to spend a first decade of my career not doing security, but there's also a lot of positives in there. If you've been doing development work and you know how web applications are built, mobile apps are built, and things like that, and how databases work, you're already a huge step ahead of a lot of people trying to become pen testers because web applications are everywhere. It's what most companies will come to you to have done, second only to maybe network pen testing, where you would need to know more on the networking side and how that whole structure works. So if you don't know where to start with becoming an offensive security expert, I would start with focusing either on web apps or on networks. Understand the fundamentals on how those things work, how they get deployed, how they get maintained, how they operate inside of organizations. And you don't even have to start worrying about offensive tools yet until you understand those core concepts on how things should work in an organization. Whether you're talking about what types of training to go towards when you get to that point in your career, I'll be a little selfish here. I have a couple classes that are completely focused around offensive tools. One's offensive tooling foundations, and the other one is offensive tooling for operators, which is a little bit above that foundational class. But in those, we cover a whole lot of offensive tools that run the gamut for different types of tests. Because one of the things that I found out, and this is great for because of your question, is people try to get into offensive security because it's the sexy title. You're penetration tester, you're a red teamer, you're breaking things, you're compromising networks. But then you immediately run into a wall of saying, well, there's hundreds of tools out there. Which ones do I actually need to know? Which ones hit pay dirt more often in an engagement? And where is my resource to just learn about those things? So that's something that I struggled with at first as well, is that I didn't know which tools exist and which don't. So I created a class to help people move into that direction of a collection of foundational tools and a collection of other offensive tools that you can use to get yourself into pen testing or red teaming type of role.
Very cool. It's amazing how much options there are out there now
Mm-hmm.
compared to several years ago. I mean, because as far as some of the lesser expensive stuff really didn't exist much, 12 years or longer.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that we've seen a shift over the last half decade or decade in the industry, is this openness of creating offensive tools that exist out there. And there's some conversation that's always been there around, well, you put out this open source tool that does this very bad thing, and now attackers have it too. I guarantee that those attackers, if they were there's nothing special about the developer that created the tool. If that attacker has any technical ability at all as well, and they have time to spend on it, they're going to figure it out as well. What these tools provide us for professionals trying to secure environments is a way to execute these types of paths quicker in a repeatable way in order to find those holes as quickly as possible. One of the things that I do for my classes, and I reiterate through the class, is I try not to talk about any of the tools that cost you $3,000 licenses. Of course, we do have to talk about some because they're staples of the industry, but the free ones get you a lot of runway and a lot of latitude. I use mostly free tools in my engagements. And one of the things that we harp on for pen testing on an engagement is that we don't have a lot of time to do our tests. My typical network test is about 5 days, or typical web app pen test is 5 days. I don't get months to sit in the environment and figure things out. So the tools are essential to do your job quickly. Understanding those is a very core thing for our field.
Cool. So yeah, it's kind of interesting so what do you think as far as certifications go, are those a requirement?
So I do have a number of certifications myself. As I mentioned before, when I started off in my position in Equifax being a non-security role, one of the things I parlayed into doing those security things was to get proper certifications, proper training, real practical things that can help. In that path for me, certifications weren't a barrier. I wasn't applying blatantly with no experience to a security position and having to hit that wall of, the position description wants all these specific type of certifications or close matches to them. I think in the world of applying just blankly to open positions, certifications do serve their purpose. They get you past, in a lot of cases, they get you past that HR wall of approval or review or things like that to get you to that next step. I don't think that they're 100% necessary, at least largely in our industry, as an indicator of skill specifically, like practical ability. There are certifications out there that test your practical ability for sure, but most of them don't. Most of them are memorization. Most of them are a multiple choice that had no real critical thinking behind it. And those ones I think are, you know, there's conversation around whether they're valuable or not, right? If you are a CISO, if you're an auditor, if you're a compliance professional, knowing those things that are more memorization, 100% go your way. For technical positions, um, I look more at people's past roles. Like I said before, if you were a sysadmin, if you were a network admin, if you were a web dev, and you want to come and be a pen tester, I'm going to say, if you've done web application development for 5 or 10 years, I'm going to ask you a question about that web app stuff as to how I would approach it, and I want to know how you would think of it in either way. It's really more just switching over to abusing things rather than building things.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's kind of interesting to see some of the people in the industry that have gotten by without certs. Actually, when I got my first pen testing role, I didn't have any pen testing certs. I had the CISSP, which is not helpful as a pen tester at all. And but I know nowadays that it's a little more difficult to get those jobs because in 2012, not a lot of people knew of pen testing roles at the time. And I think that's one of the things that kind of why training shifted, because if you think back to 2012, when the OSCP was around,
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty much only people that worked in security, pen testers or something like that knew about that. And now there's a lot of people know about that certification that aren't even in IT, because, just a lot of this information on certifications is more widely shared. People see it as a way, this is a good way to make a lot of money. I want to do
Mm-hmm.
this. And so it seems like, then going back to the budgeting thing, back then the courses were a little bit less, but then again, if you're a IT professional with a decent amount of years of experience, you were probably making enough money to be able to afford the OSCP. Whereas now you've got people coming in brand new, and to be able to cough up, a couple $1,000s or so to be able to take a certification
Mm-hmm.
training course is a little bit tougher.
It is hard, that paywall of people trying to shoulder that cost themselves as individuals trying to advance their own career. That's one of the things that, again, I was fortunate with my path in of an organization who said, okay, we will do training. I found ways to make it cheaper. I found ways to make it work, but it helped not having to shoulder that cost myself. Right? It helped tremendously. There'd be no way that I would have gotten that sort of information on my own dime. I just wouldn't have been able to pursue it. There are a lot more resources out there today than there were, almost 10 years ago or more, either with free webcasts that are given with technical resources and blog posts out. You're not starting from this blank slate anymore. You can go find most of the information you need. It's the method of applying it. It's the stories behind how the tools are used and how things are abused that I find most useful in trainings, is to put them in the context of an actual engagement, which is something that I fear. Again, a lot of people who try to get into the offensive side of things, they look at training as I'm going to do this thing and then I will be able to do this job. I will understand every step along the way. And people can be faulted in that line of thinking that if I go get this certification, I can then do this job. But if you've never read a pen test, if you've never read a ticket from a red team engagement and found out what's actually wrong and then how to fix it, you're not going to really pick that up from a lot of training classes. Whether it's a high dollar value or a low dollar value, it can be hard to glean what the real experience is from that security concept, the tools that abuse it, and the technology that help defend it. So that's where, if you find training that can answer those, give you that perspective, those are the best things. And I try to weave that into my class as best I can. I've done a few. I didn't realize it was going to become a series, but now I guess it is. I've done a webcast on Black Hills Information Security's Thursday webcasts, where I've done a series called The Illustrated Pen Tester. I've done 3 of them so far. The next one is going to be, I think, April 10th. But all it is a series of short stories that I collect from other pen testers and security professionals that I know personally. So I know the information is good. They're good stories, technically adept, but they're small intervals. Because another one of the barriers that I fell into when you're trying to get into the security world is, well, yeah, I know how to build web apps. What tools do I use? And how do I use those? And how can a successful story of using them be illustrated to a customer, to my company? How can I write this up well as a report? Because that's the deliverable. And to get there, you have to understand stories and how to tell that story to a technical person and a CISO at the same time, which can be a challenge.
So, along the lines of career advice,
Mhm.
what are some ways that someone can get some hands-on experience that would be useful in acquiring a pen testing job?
Hands-on experiences is the biggest thing, right? It's really when you're interviewing for a company, and they look at your certifications, they look at your background, and then they might start asking you to do actual things to prove your hands-on capability. That's where you're either going to make or break your interview process in your career. So some of the resources that you can do going out there is there's tons of things. There's tons of home labs you can build. There's tons of CTFs you can participate in. There's tons of cyber range environments that you can go out there and test your knowledge. But what I would recommend as a person initially trying to figure things out is just try building something yourself, right? If you spent most of your career inside that web development world and you never really dabbled in the network side of things, get yourself a few devices and set them up. The easiest thing, not the easiest thing, but the base level thing that you can do is set up a Raspberry Pi hole on your home network inside of an environment where you have authorized yourself to do things. Set that up. Figure out the DNS pitfalls, figure out your networking configurations, figure out how to get that deployed. And then when you do it, destroy it. Do it again. Destroy it. Do it again. Repeat those steps so that you start to understand, how do my firewall configurations actually play into things? How's my DNS configurations actually play into things? Because when you get inside of a network, those same concepts are what's going to matter when you're seeing things. Like I said, you can look at a tool and you can know how to write a command, but those tools are abusing network configurations that are in place. They're abusing web applications that are in place. Knowing how those things work, how the network and the web app work themselves, are a big bonus. You don't have to focus on making sure you're hacking everything right out of the gate. Try building an Active Directory environment just at your home. Don't ever try attacking anything that you don't have permission. Your home labs are your best friends. Try doing that. If you can't build that, there's a great resource, Game of Active Directory. Fantastic resource. That's a free thing you can set up locally as long as you got enough space and enough hardware to run it. That gives you a whole AD environment to attack right in your own home, right? All virtually. So look for things like that. I would start out building things yourself, tearing it down, building it again, figuring out what you don't know, learn those core concepts, and then move on to hacking.
Great advice. So yeah, you're kind of mentioning some stories. So what are one of the cooler stories you've either experienced yourself or heard someone else share about a pen test?
Sure. So I try to do when I do the Illustrated Pen Tester webcast and I share all these stories, I try to preface it with saying, I'm not saying I may speak in the first person, but it may not be me that did it. Just as a way to give a little bit of anonymity to people. So some of these are not directly me, but in terms of speaking in the first person, I was on an engagement where it was an organization. I was there to do a network pen test for them, and the organization was global. They had offices all over the world, and I wound up doing a scan, just basic Nessus scan or basic Nmap scan of the certain area of their network. I passed that through a tool called Eyewitness, which helps visualize any of the HTTP services that are discovered during that process. Nested inside of those Eyewitness report and that output was a little tag of a mention to a SecList white page or white page article that was written of a particular vulnerability. And what it turned out gravitating me towards as I looked through these scans and the outputs is they had a batch of security cameras deployed inside of their entire environment that had a known backdoor that could be exploited. And the backdoor wasn't anything complicated. It was changing, it was base 64 encoding a certain URL parameter when you just went to go visit the page, and it immediately gave you admin access to the security camera. and all of the ones that it's connected to. So I was able to sit there and watch meetings take place. And as I wrote it up and delivered it to the C-level execs, they were like, there's no way this is actually exploitable like this. It would take somebody with a lot of experience to do this, to get a hack into our security cameras. So I gave them the one line URL with the base 64 encoded value at the end and said, have 5 people on different segments of your network within your security team do this and tell me if they don't get in. They all got in immediately. So it does not take a huge amount of security and technical know-how somehow. Sometimes you just have to research in and follow those rabbit holes a little bit. Other times, there's another story of a test that was for a medical institution, a hospital. And in the course of the engagement, it was discovered that there were configure worm infections, which you have to look up how old that is. There were beaconing attempts at communication from devices within the network trying to reach out to places in other regions and other continents that this organization did not take part in. So they had active indicators of compromise going on. And working through the process with the customer on that is something that you have to be very good with if you're a good pen tester, a good red teamer, because your main job is to help them not freak out, help them identify what to do to close down any sort of communications, and work with them as best you can from a forensics perspective of what you should do step by step to make sure you're covered either legally or just from an organization from an operating sense. In that particular instance of a medical institution, one of the devices was the backup power supply for the whole hospital, the main controller for that. And the other device, I think, was a surgical imaging device, so used during surgery and had been compromised. So it's 2 very frightening things to not work well in a hospital or a medical place. Customers can very easily freak out when you tell them things. Good documentation, good guidance, and not having a mindset of, I hacked you. Ooh, you guys are so stupid, right? You didn't do X, Y, and Z. Knowing how to present material and present bad news in a constructive way can be the difference between having a pen testing career and not.
Yeah, that's great advice. Sometimes it's not so easy to deliver that news to people, and sometimes you get some of those IT folks that don't believe you because they thought they put a lot of good effort in securing that environment.
Yeah, and they're doing their best. And I always bring up, it's a very recent thing in education from an undergrad level or from a graduate level where you're trying to become a security expert. It's a very new thing for education institutions. That is, you're coming out of school trying to do that. It hasn't been around very long. So you got to understand that most of the people you're dealing with, they were never taught in a school environment how to build a web application securely. They were never taught how to deploy an Active Directory environment and keep in mind all these different abuses an attacker could do if they ever get inside of your network. So they're doing their best. And a lot of times they're doing their best on an extremely constrained budget and an extremely constrained personnel, right? I've pen tested organizations that probably should have had 5 people running their organization from a technical side. They have 1 person. And that guy is trying his damnedest. So realize sometimes you're talking to the person, this is their baby. You're telling them their baby is ugly, but also say like something nice, right? Oh, has the cutest laugh, something. I always make an effort whenever I write up reports to not only put in the negative findings, but hell, if you're just a responsive point of contact, if I send you something that's wrong and you come back to me and you want to work through it, that's a positive on my report. You're showing effort. You and the company, you're trying. And that should be noted because those pen test reports can be discoverable during breach investigations if that happens. So give people credit where it's due and understand they're people too.
So we're getting down towards the end of the episode. Is there anything you'd like to share that we haven't discussed?
So we've talked about so very much in such a little bit of time. There are times in this field where you start to get overloaded with things. There are times in this field where You might look at the environments around you and start to become extremely overwhelmed of how can anything be secure without turning it off and throwing it in the dumpster. Just know that not every things aren't meant to be 100% secure. There are no 100% secure systems, right? So don't feel like that's a mark that you have to reach as a CISO, as a web dev, as a sysadmin. It is an unattainable goal to be 100% secure. It's best to do everything you can, obviously. Go beyond the little checklist audits that will get you just technically in an operating capacity, because a lot of them don't address security from a real practical perspective. And just try to work with each other, right? If you hire a pen testing organization, we're here to help you. Don't be adversarial in your engagements. We're all trying to do the same thing for each other. That's one of the bigger things to keep in mind for everybody that can sometimes get lost.
Yeah, that's some great advice. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Phillip Wylie Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Phillip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Phillip Wylie. Until next time.